Welcome back, everyone. This is part 8 on What If Spider-Man Was in My Hero Academia. Disclaimer: I do not own any of the characters in this video. They belong to their own respected authors. And now let's go to the What If, Chapter 9.
Katsuki Bakugo's life sucks, and if you tell him otherwise, you suck. Keeping his mouth mostly shut has been grating on his sanity for the last 3 days, but it's all becoming far too much. There's Deku, stronger than is even remotely possible for an allegedly quirkless runt like him. Todoroki, who, damn it, may just be an actual challenge. Finally, Parker, the short, mousy Yankee that somehow measured up to the aforementioned half-and-half prick. What's he got to show for his first week at Uaparata? An embarrassing loss. Being upshown by Deku not once, but twice in a row, and feeling small next to a neurotic jerk-off that barely spoke a word and a sniveling twerp that isn't even from here. It all makes him sick! It makes him sick. It drives him to wretch. Did all justice, logic and reason die in the space of a few months? Surely they had to be punished for their transgressions. They broke the law, and the law was that Katsuki was the biggest beast in the bestiary. All malefactors and detractors are to be met with extreme prejudice, and everyone who falls in line gets to be the extras on screen for his big debut. So far, no one has fallen in line. All these plucky, smiling losers are just existing peacefully without considering how he felt about it. Not to mention the sudden case of Deku fever everyone has, that the whole universe has. Really, to think that after all these years of the twerp's pathetic wailing, Katsuki would be the one shedding tears at Uaparata's doorstep. All the while the lying, scheming, useless loser got to sit there and enjoy humiliating the only person who'd even deign to give him the time of day. The wimp actually making friends was one thing, but being voted class president, that just might have been the last straw for Katsuki. Yes, actually, it was the last straw. Bakugo stands from his seat at the lunchroom table, eliciting surprised looks from the extras in his orbit, and casts a glare at Deku from across the lunchroom. Hey, where are you headed? Asks, horn hair, red hair, hairbrain. Katsuki would think of a more scathing nickname later, when his thoughts are not so clouded by all the unyielding rage. Just setting the record straight is all he says, marching off towards the smiling idiot trio of Deku, Bobblehead and 4-Eyes. In the very same cafeteria, Kaminari talks about mochi. She said she liked mochi. He says, quiet enough that the sound of his voice is drowned out by the cacophony of the cafeteria. So I'm gonna ask her out next week and open with that. Be like, hey Uraraka, I know this great mochi place nearby or something. Mineta, looking characteristically impish, props his stubby elbows on the table and rests his head between his palms. Do you know a great mochi place nearby? Pouting, Kaminari replies, well, no, but I have till next week to figure out the best mochi place in town. And then I'm gonna start putting on the charm. Start off slow then. See, that's where you're mistaken. Mineta wiggles a finger at the blonde, speaking in a low, sage-like tone. Chicks don't like the type of guy who comes off too passive. You've gotta let them know what you're after. Peter on the sidelines takes another ravenous bite out of the egg sando Lunch Rush had provided. Perfectly salted, perfectly cooked. The silky texture almost brings him to tears, attempting to block out the unfortunate, violent, wet gnashing of Parker having lunch. Kaminari continues. I thought you said going too fast was a mistake yesterday. There is going too fast, and then there's tiptoeing. If you open with a mochi date, she's gonna think all you're looking for is a mochi date. Kaminari flinches when Parker burps after taking a heavy swig of milk from his second glass bottle. I mean, isn't that like the point, though, of dating and stuff? Start as friends, then you know. He gestures at nothing at all, letting the blanks fill themselves. Mineta chuckles, sinister and arrogant. You've got the whole game wrong, my newfound adopted friend. The point is to a sickening wet crunch like a pigeon smashing into the windshield of a car and exploding interrupts Mineta as Parker's molars monstrously masticate on something crispy. The point is to get, Mineta tries to say. But Parker is not done being a nuisance. A fit of coughs, caused by a too dense mouthful of steamed rice, sends a stray wet grain soaring into Mineta's eye. Kaminari stifles a laugh. Parker, looking contrite, mumbles out a meek, sorry. Truth be told, Peter had table manners, at one point in his life at least. Mom had ingrained a few things here and there that stuck, like vestiges of a life he never really got to live. Ben and May Parker were not so particular about their eating rituals, however. Being two old hippies who lived with no kids and never hosted dinners unless it was for special occasions, usually ordering or relying on their shared meager cooking skills, meant they never really needed to look good in front of anyone. As a result, mealtimes in the Parker household were a terrifying sight to behold. They had tried to instill good practices very early on in his life with them, May especially, but he was an incredibly malleable child. It just so happened that watching Uncle Ben choke down a chocolate babka from the bakery in 9 seconds after picking it up with his bare hand can really rub off on a kid. May at least made sure he had a decent handle on his portion sizes. It was really sort of a miracle they had managed to stay in shape to begin with. Thus, Peter Parker always ate lunch at school with Mary Jane, being that she was the only person that could stand it until he met Harry. And Harry could only put up with it because he saw Peter's behavior as free-spirited. Whatever it was he meant by that, it only became an issue for him personally when he started snacking as Spider-Man during longer patrols. Intimidating cowardly criminals could be a bit more difficult to juggle when you've got flecks of pizza sauce on your spider symbol, and someone feels a need to point it out. Kaminari gives Parker's messy tray a weary look. You'd think you were starving, dude. Are you? Gagging. Mineta wipes the rice and Parker spit off his face. No, just hungry, which isn't a lie. Peter's been forgetting to have breakfast. Sorry. It's cool. Just keep me out of the splash zone, alright. Truth be told, Kaminari seems almost pleasantly surprised that there was a part of Parker that could be this colorful, aside from the part that was very good at punching things, at least. Mineta, on the other hand, remains most displeased. You gross caveman. How do you eat like that? Peter replies, giving him a shrug and a bashful look. Hungry. Did they not teach you table manners in the States? Are you trying to make us look like freaks? Actually, Kaminari interjects, All the yelling is probably doing worse for us. He tries to make himself look smaller as it seems that Minata's bleeding was beginning to catch other students' attention. The three look around, eventually noticing that they were barely being looked at all. They were being looked past, regarded as more of a disturbance than anything else. A few tables over, a storm was brewing. Bakugo, irate looking and loud as ever, is saying something they could all just barely make out in the crowd. A lot of it was the word Deku, which all three can recall Bakugo saying more than once in reference to Midoriya, and it seemed that Uraraka, looking now furious next to the ever-diffident Midoriya beside her, had taken to using the nickname as well. The four seemed to be arguing about something. Ida makes those funny hand motions while Midoriya stammers out responses so quiet they couldn't possibly catch a word of it. All the while Bakugo grows increasingly annoyed by Uraraka's interjections, and, as is his wont, Bakugo's the first to really snap. Wrapping a heavy hand around Midoriya's shoulder and giving it a rough tug, just going to talk to him, so buzz off bobblehead. And Uraraka's a second, a snap of plastic against jawbone peels across the cafeteria. All present wince at just the sound. The movement happens with a speed and suddenness such that anyone who hadn't already been staring missed it entirely. Uraraka had, in the instant Bakugo finished his insult, swung her lunch tray with enough force to send him scrambling back, head angled toward the ceiling, silent as he persists the pain and shakes away the shock of the moment. In accordance with the brutality they had just witnessed, Kaminari, Peter, and Mineta cringe a little. "Oh dude," Kaminari mutters, barely audible in the low din of chatter. "Did she just? He's gonna lose it," Mineta adds, knowing quite well by now that the other boy was not to be trifled with. The display he'd put on against Midoriya had just left enough of an impression as is. Peter almost thinks he's right. Anxiously, he watches Uraraka stand and burn into Bakugo with a fiercely defiant look. Bakugo, who cups his jaw and stares right back at her, a dangerous look in his eye, shocked as he is enraged. A beat passes. There's an overwhelming air of apprehension in the room, tinged with glee as the Hellions among them cross their fingers and hope for an even bigger scene to be made. Uraraka's friends are stunned, Midoriya looking positively pallid and Ida at a complete loss for words. Some of their class make an effort to situate themselves behind Bakugo, expecting to hold him back from charging forward and giving the girl his swift and painful rebuttal. "What is going on?" a voice says from above, deep and sonorous, tinny as though filtered through some sort of apparatus. The hero ectoplasm, otherwise known as their math teacher, stands at the top of the stairwell leading into the rest of the building. A pause, then, "I will ask again, and I expect one of you to answer. What's going on?" Another pause, then, totally started it. "That guy's a big jerk. She gave him a concussion. Chick's a nut job. May I be excused?" One, ectoplasm yells, screams over the uproar of voices that he'd inadvertently caused. "I said one of you. Just the one. Akako, Uraraka's life sucks, and if you tell her otherwise, well, that in mind, she really isn't certain why she had so much hope for things now that she was attending Uaparata Shore. This was supposed to be a prestigious school for cream of the crop. But that didn't mean the occasional utter jerk-off couldn't slip through the cracks every now and again, sort of like she did. For all the color and glamour of the institution's public identity, places like it were just beacons for contemptible idiots with something to prove to come sauntering into. Were it not for Deku and Ida, she might have suspected that the bulk of students were this way, what was Bikugo being his apoplectic self. And that Kaminari kid clearly trying to put the moves on her. The thought makes her want to gag. She can't even bear the thought of having scared Deku and Ida off right now. It wasn't even worth thinking about. Better to let herself stew in her own rage than face whatever comeuppance she gets for standing up for what's right. But here she is, sitting before Hound Dog and being told that she's under risk of suspension in her first week. Even if Bikugo's by now well-known wrath did earn her some sympathy, it wasn't enough that she would have to be more careful going forward. If she was lucky, Bikugo wouldn't give her a reason to act again. Though asking Akako Uraraka to be lucky, of all things, was easier said than done. And we'll have to call and inform your parents of what happened here today. I understand the boy's temperament and your history, but that sort of behavior just won't stand in the boundaries of this school. Do you understand? Hound Dog finishes, dutifully. The girl puts on her best face, bleary-eyed and innocent in a way that might suggest today was little more than an outlier, a nasty stain on her blooming career. Yes, of course, Mr. Inui. It'll never happen again. No, but seriously, Kaminari starts again, eliciting a hushed groan from Mineta. Bikugo's a jerk. Dude probably had it coming. He's just lucky I didn't step in to help her out. Mineta shakes his head, fastening one of the straps of his backpack as they all ambled out the school's front door to end yet another day, bathed in the warm glowing light which reflected off the comprehending glass of Uapparata's fought, as if, besides, I don't think you want to get with Uraraka anymore. She acts all cute and innocent, but she's totally crazy. That's the type you steer clear from. Maybe I like a little crazy, eh? He gives Mineta a little nudge, needing to lean down just enough to get him in the shoulder, almost sending the littlest of them tumbling over. Turning to the rest of his posse, Kaminari asks, Parker, what do you think? Peter just thinks that there's too much animosity brewing in the school for superheroes, but he doesn't quite have the words to express that sentiment yet. Yeah, crazy. Hey, do either of you know where to buy parts? Peter asks instead, uncertain in his language and uneven in his lilt. Kaminari's eyes widen a little with curiosity. Like, car parts? No, metal parts. Small metal parts. Like for fixing things. He pulls his bag around, unzipping it, rummaging around for a moment and plucking the mangled remains of his web shooter from the bottom. Kaminari stares at the thing quizzically, leaning over and inspecting it more closely. Need parts to fix this. Oh, that's one of your webby things, right? Yeah, I dunno where you can buy stuff to fix that, sorry. He shrugs. Peter turns to Mineta, receives nothing more than a disappointing head shake. And now he's without much more recourse beyond asking one of the school staff tomorrow or simply promenading around the city until he found some place that sold perfectly sized hinges and nozzles with adjustable diameter. meaning that he would have to live with the odd nakedness of not having webs at the ready again. Peter's broken from his grousing by Kaminari piping up again. Cheery as ever. We can look around for some place at the mall if you've got time. I'm looking to pick up some new clothes myself, gotta keep the style up to date. I also have a few things to pick up. Mineta adds, so we can all go together. Alright, first team trip to the mall. Kaminari pumps his fists, and Peter can only give them both a half-hearted smile. No, he wasn't technically being dragged into this at all. But being that he is who he isn't all too enthusiastic about perusing store aisles with these two, of all people, nor is he entirely sure why Kaminari was calling them a team at all. They've known each other for less than a week. Failing to find any store that might sell something he could jury-rig into a spinneret was expected, but still disappointing. Peter ends up following Kaminari into a clothing store instead, which leads to a whole host of other, far less consequential but still quite aggravating problems. I just don't know which works, Kaminari mumbles, standing in the middle of the pristine store aisle while Peter sat hunched in front of him, thoughts becoming more like television. Static as too loud pop music reverberates through the concrete, and his eyes ache whenever he dares to look at the sterile whiteness of the walls, made more excruciating by the bright lights that hung above. They've been at this for an hour and 14 minutes. 17 seconds. Peter hasn't been keeping count on purpose. He just sort of knows. Really? This sort of thing wasn't new to him. It's just that in any other case he'd at least be getting to look at Mary Jane instead. Would it be mean to call this a waste of time? Kaminari holds aloft two shirts that Peter can't tell the difference between. So, I'm trying to find a good look for the fall. Double quotes. And oh, it is. I'm allowed to think that I have better things to be doing with my life than this. But I'm thinking, what if I get something for fall and winter? Like, something for both. Man, that jerk Todoroki just had to break my webs. Now I have to get that all fixed again. One door closes. Another slams right into my face. The thing is, I already own a shirt kinda like this. So is it worth it? A pause. Yeah, totally is. Yet no, I haven't actually tried clicking my heels together yet. Maybe that'll fix things. So what do you think? Kaminari asks, looking down over expectantly. Peter, in his native tongue, mumbles, I think this how I die again. Kaminari tilts his head a little the way a dog does to pinpoint the source of a sound. Huh, the blue one, is Peter's more genuine input, followed by a sigh. The blonde doesn't say anything in response for a moment, looking at Peter with quizzical consideration. Kaminari purses his lips, starts to say something before stopping himself, waits, and then just smiles like there's nothing in the world worth caring too much about. Listen, he starts, grabbing Peter's attention once more. I don't figure you're having too much fun sitting there watching me try stuff on. So, what say we look around for anything you like? What say we look around for anything you like? Peter shifts around awkwardly, rubbing the back of his neck and briefly thinking back to all the sweater vests in his closet. Oh, that's not. Don't sweat it, man. Kaminari sits aside one of the shirts, sidling over to Peter and patting him on the shoulder. I figure you still miss the States and all. But if you wanna get comfortable, you gotta look comfortable. Fit in, yet no.
A beat passes. Peter isn't entirely sure how to respond to any of this, so he thinks I'm just feeling homesick. That's kind of a thoughtful gesture, I guess. Kaminari snaps his fingers, breaking Parker out of his own thoughts. Let's get started. What ensues can be, politely, described as a dehumanizing experience for Peter Parker. Kaminari, with his trendy sensibilities and strong opinions on what style best complemented the small mole on Peter's cheek, took to gathering piles of far too expensive, most oversized and more colorful articles of clothing than the sort of attire the New Yorker is used to wearing. They trailed down each and every aisle. Kaminari stopping every now and again to examine a shirt for himself or for his newfound friend, excitedly pulling Peter aside and gushing about how he'd heard a certain article had come into fashion because some celebrity or another wore it last week. Peter was not one to judge, nor was he the sort to think less of a person for their hobbies and interests. However, Kaminari reminded him of the sort of girls Mary Jane would talk smack about while they did homework, making all manner of disparaging comments about their disagreeable choices of blouse to wear to their sophomore chemistry course. Those girls and this boy were just loud, in so many more ways than one. Now, dressed against his will in a casual bright yellow button-up and pants that were so purple he expects someone might hulk out in them, he starts to feel loud, hand on his chin. Kaminari examines his classmate with the trained eye of a teenage boy with too much social media access. I'm thinking this is a good look for you. We can definitely work on the hair. Seriously? Did you jam your head in a blender? No, Peter bristles, turning around and marching back into the changing booth, slamming the door shut. Later, they're in the too long line leading to the cash register, trapped between a wall of shoes and a long rack of brand-name sweaters. Peter's unsure of how exactly Kaminari had gotten him to land on clothes to buy, but he isn't all too dissatisfied with his choices. Plus, they were the cheapest options he felt he could wear in public. I'd say we could stop at another store after this. Boo, we probably wasted too much time here. I bet Maneda's waiting downstairs for us. I wonder what it is he bought. Anyways, Kaminari says, talking at Peter more than with him. We could come by sometime this weekend, but you mentioned you had that whole thing with your community service or whatever. That's so lame. By the way, like, totally stupid. Peter only nods, thinking there might be credence to the theory that standing in line actually does slow down time. Not much of it really passes, but it feels like forever, and they're only about 3 spots further by the time Peter wants to jam his head through the wall because the store speakers are blaring the same song they did 20 minutes ago, which they had also played 5 minutes before that, while he believed, in the moment, that nothing could be worse than waiting in line. The universe decided it would refute his claim, spider sense, tingling harder than usual. Kaminari notices the change in his classmate's demeanor instantly, sees immediately the way Peter perks up, turning to look at the expanse of the store like a deer that's heard a twig crack in the woods. Yet there wasn't a sound wave out of place. Nothing worth seeing other than more shoppers sifting through clothes and asking employees to reach up high shelves. His eyes dart everywhere he can possibly see, heart thrumming in his ears as he tries to make sense of the impression spider sense gave him. The danger felt close, to be sure, yet he didn't know how close, or in what direction it would come from. Everything all right there, Parker? The answer Kaminari receives is not from Peter, but from the store's lights, which go out like blown candles not a second after his concern is voiced. Oh, man, that's never happened. The blonde reaches into his pocket, pulling out his phone as panic starts to stir in the rest of the store. Not the sort that's gotten everyone screaming. It's that budding anxiety that typically accompanies this sort of thing. People telling themselves and their friends that everything's quite alright. It's just the light going out. There's nothing really hiding in the dark. No matter what their animal brains tell them to look out for, nothing terrible could happen in a place like this. Spider Sense's warning grows stronger, sharper. The light of Kaminari's phone comes on, illuminating the boy's face. Light cascading up the wall beside him. Peter's sixth sense tingles its counsel, and before he knows it, he's already pitched his head up at its behest. Up the wall, oriented like an insect and clinging to it in much the same way Peter would. A monster is in position to pounce. Its skin, sickly pale and green-tinted, stretches taut over turgid spindly muscle. Its arms were meters in length, each finger stretching a foot with 4-toed feet accoutered with predatory talons. Its mouth, if one could call it that, was a long beak like drill of bone teeth filed to razor sharpness. Between cracks of bone and muscle tissue were little streaks and spots of drool which pooled together and rolled down its weaponized mouth in large droplets. The creature's eyes were bloodshot and beady, pupils dilated as though it had only ever seen sun, embedded in the sides of an exposed brain that pulsed and shivered, and caught the rays of the cell phone's flashlight with a wet gleam. Someone probably pulled something, Kaminari says, and unbeknownst to him the creature's left hand, reared back before he spoke, swings down at him with lethal speed from behind, like a prank or whatever. Run, quick as a whip and strong as an ox. Peter hurriedly shoves Kaminari over to the side, catching the thing's hand with both of his own and finding relief in the fact that it isn't strong as it is frightening. The people behind them, another couple of confused teens, jump in response to the sudden movement in the dark. God, what is this thing? He thinks, gripping tighter and grunting as the creature applies more pressure than before. The low, irate rumble from its chest is enough to put him on edge. Is it a person? Can people look like this here? Acting on his feet, he changes his grip, wrapping both hands around the monster's wrist and tugging instead of pushing, even as the thing's spindly fingers wrap around his torso. Everyone, get away, he yells, heaving the thing's weight with all his might and ripping it from the wall. Squinting as chipped paint and drywall falls into his eyes, more cell phone lights come on, screams erupting from everyone unfortunate enough to lay their eyes on the thing, screams too close, too distracting. Peter has trouble tuning it out, especially when he can't see more than a few feet in front of him. He tries to focus on the feeling, the tactile sensation of smashing the monster against the marble floor of the empty store aisle, shattering racks of clothes and shelves of shoes into broken piles with the sounds of crashes and clangs and more screams in the dark. The impact is strong enough to nearly punch through the floor, which isn't what Peter wants, but it's becoming increasingly difficult to get himself together as the screams grow louder and lights shine in his eyes. The thing wails in what Peter hopes is pain, the vulturine sound carrying through the store and warning all who weren't already aware of the danger they were in. They sprint out towards the glassy exit, and the movement is sudden and raucous enough that it catches the creature's attention more than Peter. It moves much faster than a thing that large and unwieldy ought to as it bounds towards the fleeing flock of panicked civilians. Spider-Man's fast too, just fast enough to intercept it, leaping onto its wide back and wrapping both arms around its thick and torsional neck. The pressure applied enough to stop it in its tracks and get its attention. Okay, whatever. Gotta beat it up before asking about its taxonomy, Peter thinks, holding on tight as the monster sways to and fro in an attempt to swing him off his back. But the young hero won't budge. Luckily you don't seem too smart, just a rung below the weirdos I typically deal with. Let's see if you just stay still and go to sleep so I can go back to having a. Before he can finish that thought, Spider-Man eats his words. The monster sets both palms on the shattered flooring, drool pooling on the surface below its face as its smaller enemy chokes the air out of its lungs, with awful bone cracks and sounds of muscle tissue being pulled and torn that Peter might never forget. Its arms begin to extend, pushing it up off the ground at an impossible speed as its arms stretch upward. Its back, and therefore Peter himself, smash through a light fixture and into the ceiling of the store with a thunderous crash, eliciting more panic from the remaining shoppers who can't quite find their way out. Ow! Stuck in the ceiling like a decorative ornament, Peter's disoriented for one moment too many. The sounds of it thrashing and screaming below urge him to get moving, but it's already back on its feet and searching for prey on the ground floor. A brief lull, the frantic lights flicker and fade as more people funnel out of the store. It's about to move again. Then, a noise like firecrackers as the soles of Peter Parker's shoes slam right into the thoracic curve of the beast's spine, no doubt cracking a few vertebrae. From there, Peter springs off its back, pike flipping and deftly landing just a few feet across from it. Over here, pal, Peter says, fists clenched, sweat forming on his brow. How's about we go a few rounds before you up and leave? The beast seems to oblige, galloping at him with an almost canine gait, large hands digging into the floor, wide arms tearing down the odd clothes rack or unfortunate mannequin in its way. Peter's sight, though largely adjusted to the dark, by now, could make out the immense shape of the thing, but evading its attacks would be more difficult from there on. He could only hope it moved predictably enough that it wouldn't be an issue. On the first attack his hopes seemed to have been confirmed. It swipes at him with its left. The strike leapt over and countered with a powerful kick to its neck, sending it reeling. Tough stuff, Peter thinks, bouncing off its shoulder the moment it reaches to grab at him with its opposite hand. Need to wear it down. Slow it down. Thank you. To Dorky. for busting my webs. He lands heavy on his toes, careful not to leave himself open. Spider's sense rings like someone's pulled a fire alarm, and he has to get moving once more, faster than before, but just a hair too slow. Its large paw strikes the cracked marble where Spider-Man once stood, the hero having launched himself upward to avoid being crushed. Had Spider-Man expected the thing to have any ability to learn, he might have seen the next attack coming. Its other arm shoots forward far faster than the last few strikes, the bone-cracking noise felt in the very walls as its limb stretches to clear what little distance there was between them. Latching onto his chest, the beast's arm maintains its forward momentum as it stretches across the store, eventually pinning its teenage prey up against a wall. Peter struggles, thrashing and pushing as its grip on his chest tightens. From across the store, he notices a shift. The creature goes eerily still. Then, as though flipping a switch, the tooth-layered beak activates. Its beak spins as a drill of flesh and bone primed to tear Spider-Man apart. It takes its first heavy steps toward him, the arm shrinking inch by sinewy inch. No, come on. Peter pushes against its fingers, feeling too little give to free himself from its grip. All hope seems lost as he struggles and writhes under its hand, the thing getting closer by the moment. But Peter had forgotten one crucial fact. He wasn't the only hero hopeful present. With a burst of light and an electric crackle from behind, the beast is stopped with a scream. Its grip goes tighter than ever before for a moment before releasing, the extended arm going slack at his feet. Not one to waste an opportunity, Spider-Man picks its limp arm up off the ground and holds it tight. The store's all but empty. He's free to cause some damage, and he's more than a little miffed. Spider-Man torques his hips and violently swings the creature by its arm into the far wall of the store, utterly destroying what's left and boring a hole through the wall and into the back rooms. Kaminari, revealed from behind where the monster once stood, looks awestruck as he watches Peter get his bearings. The splayed-out hand lays coiled in front of him like a dead worm. With the monster seemingly dispatched, the brown-haired boy ambles through the wreckage to reach his classmate. Then Peter gets a better look at Kaminari in the dark, and he is not awestruck at all, certainly struck by something. "Thank you for the rescue. Kaminari, are you alright?" he tries, grabbing the taller boy by the shoulders and giving him a good shake. His eyes were crossed and his pupils were dilated. Smoke seemed to be coming out of his ears. If Peter can see it right, the blonde's lips part, then come back together. His mouth opens again. "Yay," he moans, high-pitched and dim. "Okay, whatever." Peter gives him an appreciative clap on the shoulders, turning back to the hole he'd thrown the monster through. Too dark to tell how far it's gone, but it didn't seem to have moved, if the arm draped over the opening told him anything. But to his chagrin, its finger twitches, his spider sense goes again, and he's rearing for another scrape, until with all that terrible snapping, the arm retracts, slinking back into the darkness and knocking around some rubble and strewn clothing in its wake. No, seriously. Peter attempts to chase after it, but is just too late. By the time he reaches the opening, the creature has disappeared as silently as it entered. He throws his arms up, exasperated. "Seriously? Police?" he hears a voice say from the store entrance, echoing through the ruined walls of the store. "A hero is in the way. Stand down and save yourself the trouble." Spider-Man presses his palm to his face, hoping the burgeoning headache was from the indignation and not the earlier impact. Yay. Shota Aizawa's job sucks, that is all. Dealing with kids was enough. Dealing with mid-evening video calls with the rest of the school staff to do progress reports was a whole other ordeal. Not that it was a regular issue. Barring the occasional disagreements with Koyama and chiding from Nizu, he could put up with work-related meetings. The issue today, however, was the subject of his very own homeroom Class 1A, and two students he didn't quite expect to be at odds with one another, which certainly goes to show just how good he is at reading a classroom. Hope that you proceed with greater scrutiny over student adherence to the dress code, Mr. Kan, says the principal, his usually smooth voice coming through Aizawa's headset a little choppier than usual. Vlad King only nods in a way that seems non-committal, but the man takes his job too seriously for anyone there to doubt he'd start cracking down. Oddly enough, he's the only one other than Ectoplasm that ever attends these calls in full costume. Now, Nizu continues, prudent and dignified. I understand that this might be a sour subject to some, but the time has come we face another challenge with this batch of first years. This is of course in reference to the altercation had between the students of Class A that took place during lunch period. Thank you again for disarming the situation, Ectoplasm. Right. To make sure this sort of incident doesn't happen again, I believe it would be beneficial too. The unidentifiable furry white creature trails off, seeming to stare at something on the left side of his screen. He reads it, expression shifting into some close approximation of a grimace. Oh dear, Mr. Aizawa. Shota perks up, a tad nervous to hear his name called so suddenly. Yes, sir. It seems that two of your students have gotten themselves into a bit of a predicament again. And the monster was on the wall, yes, and the monster had big arms, and the big teeth, big. Peter holds his arms out to his sides, trying to properly express the absurd wingspan of the beast that got away. To his left, Kaminari stares at a street lamp and gives it 2 thumbs up, very big brain too. The officer draws a question mark on his notepad. Peter sighs, ever since they were dragged out of the store and into the open plaza. Kaminari in a much more literal sense. They'd been held outside among patrol cars and ambulances for questioning, along with other citizens who were in the store at the time of the power outage. However, as more fingers were pointed and stories were heard, it became clear who had saved the day before the heroes arrived, which also meant that they would be reprimanded for unlicensed quirk use once questioning was over and done with, much to Peter's chagrin. Granted, questioning was taking an awfully long time. Peter's having trouble communicating with the local language, and Kaminari is having trouble naming all the colors of the rainbow. After much back and forth that garnered disappointing results, they had essentially hit a brick wall. No one could identify the attacker well enough, and Peter's poorly articulated descriptions were proving insufficient. So you say he had bird feet? The broad-chinned officer asks with a desultory click of his pen, bored eyes scanning the disheveled rascal, as in, sharp claws, on his feet, like a bird. Peter monotones weary, face like a lot of teeth. Right. Well, my fellow officers and Slipstream haven't found where he might have run off to, but we'll find it. The officer stores his pen and his pad, wringing his hands and looking between both students almost sympathetically. You're still going to have to stick around. Clerical work. Listen, if it were me, this wouldn't be the case, but, right, yes, no problem. Peter nods dispirited. He leans against the patrol car with his arms crossed, looking out into the gathering crowds and news crews. The outage had been mall-wide, but only their store had the misfortune of an unwanted visitor, which came as an immense relief, as far as Peter can tell from where he's standing. Early investigation seems to indicate it might have come in through the roof, which seemed to apply it, had some approximate knowledge of how to quietly infiltrate places, a fact that bothers Peter to no end. A thunk of boots on steel gets his attention. He looks over his shoulder, craning his neck a bit, to see none other than Mr. Aizawa, wearing an odd pair of goggles along with his usual attire, perched atop the cop car and glaring down at him. Not that Peter can actually see his eyes, but he can only assume that the man is glaring. It's one of the two emotions he's had the opportunity to observe. Do either of you still need medical attention? Mr. Aizawa asks through grinding teeth. I don't think so. You're free to go. The teacher states. Both of you, out of here now. I'll clear everything with the authorities. Peter's eyebrows raise. But what about now? Double quotes. So poor Peter Parker's forced to collect his delirious classmate, whose attention had been drawn to a store sign that was a few shades of purple too bright for him to ignore, and marches out of there with no clue as to where he should head next. When they've escaped the gathering horde outside the mall, empty-handed yet free, Peter is at a loss for where to go from there. Kaminari is still out of it, though beginning to form some approximations of words, and he isn't sure how long it'll be before he can safely leave the guy on his own. They're halfway down a crowded sidewalk, Peter catching a few sidelong glances, given the state of his uniform, when he hears another familiar voice. Parker, Kaminari, that you? Quick footsteps follow close behind, with Kaminari slung over his shoulder. Peter turns and sees no one making direct eye contact with him. Then he catches a purple sheen at the bottom of his periphery and dips his head down, now looking directly at Mineta. What the heck happened back there? They're halfway down the road leading to Mineta's apartment building when Kaminari finally gets his wits about him. He proceeds to regale Mineta with a story of Herculean fortitude and legendary bravery against a demon in the dark, and it was just gonna shred him. Mineta asks, horrified at the loose description of the creature he received. Oh yeah, but I totally saved his butt there. If not for me, Parker would have been. Saved your butt first, Parker remarks, receiving surprised stares from the other two. What? It is true. Well yeah, Kaminari clarifies. But mine was way cooler, right? They all part ways not too long later. conversation having drifted away from the subject of tonight's carnage and over to the deal Mineta got on his latest figurine. This one a detailed sculpt of a buxom heroine Peter might be ashamed to make eye contact with if they were to ever cross paths. Peter stops Kaminari before he steps into the train station to ensure he's alright, heading home alone. But the blonde just writes off his concern as an eagerness to overtake him in the newfound tallying of times they've saved each other's life. Thus, Peter is left alone in the night beneath the coppery spotlights of the overhanging lamps, walking across an overpass headed in a direction he's only somewhat certain is home. On nights like these, Spider-Man's mind usually ran amok with anxious pondering, drawing him towards the deep shadows where the monster might lurk. Truth is, I've got no idea where to start looking for that thing. Whatever it was, definitely wasn't like anything I've seen so far, he thinks, dipping his head and evaluating the wear on his shoes as he walks. They've got other heroes anyways. Heck, they're probably wrangling it up right now. But his impulses, strong and petulant as they are, betray him. Well, it wouldn't hurt to take an extra look. Later, Shota Aizawa's job really sucks. I hate them. You do not, says the feminine voice over on the phone, dipped in disapproval. They're not even that bad compared to last year. With every fiber of my being, Kayama. Eraserhead leaps over another gap between buildings, steadily making his way home after a long and mind-numbing night. Nothing you say could convince me this new Class A is anything but trouble. Half are ripping each other apart or getting into some kind of trouble, and the other half are slack-jawed, irrational clowns. They're kids, and you're being a bad teacher. A pause. He knows she's being smug. Try smiling more. Maybe it's just the energy you bring to that homeroom. I mean, can you blame them? Every student likes her because she lets them get away with giving themselves ridiculous aliases and sneaking snacks and skipping out on day duty. Ridiculous. Go to bed, Kayama. You've got work tomorrow. So do you. His apartment's in sight. The simple thought of crashing on his feudin is almost mouth-watering. No, I don't. Be sure to clock in early midnight. What? He taps the red symbol and the line cuts. There'll be a volley of texts not long later, but he's sure to block all notifications from that particular contact. Nothing to disturb his restful sleep. It was in the wee hours that Spider-Man crept back into the store with a sign he could just barely read. The yellow tape was slung across the doorway and little evidence markers right around where Peter had slammed the beast on the floor and through the wall sat silently in the dark, providing no more information than he already had. Looks like they're about as lost as I am. He makes his way through the hole the thing's body created again. The phone flashlight's powdery beam illuminating the space in front of him, careful not to leave any fresh fingerprints as though that was of particular concern at the moment. No signs of it leaving, but it can't have just disappeared. He makes his way to the roof quickly afterward, noticing more tape and markers. Most notable, however, was the door of the rooftop entrance that had been ripped off its hinge and tossed aside, leaving spider-webbed cracks at the edges of the frame. It was dark, but Peter could tell there were stairs that led downward, likely into some employee-restricted area. Feeling adventurous, he wades through the dark with his blade of light and creeps down the stairwell where he found inaccessible back rooms. Quiet at this hour, there were more claw marks trailing up the walls and across the ceiling, indicating it must have made some sort of effort to hide its entry. Almost desperately, all right, guess I know how it got in. Doesn't explain how or why the lights went out at the same time. With a mighty leap, Spider-Man clings to the ceiling and follows the monster's trail, crawling his way across the surface while examining the claw marks further. He finds nothing more, no signs of where it might have left from or any hint as to how it figured out how to flip the breakers and cause a mall-wide blackout. Spider-Sense doesn't have to tell him that there was something off about all this. Not that I have the faculties to really figure it out right now. Should have listened to myself and let the legal heroes handle it. He kicks a coffee can down the sidewalk loading away from the mall, quite comfortable with the emptiness of the city's usually bustling streets. Whatever. It's not like I've got any business taking on more problems than I already have. The screen flickers white, black, white again. He taps the end of the armchair to the tune of a Steely Dan song he can't quite remember the name of. It's on the tip of his tongue, but it's been too long a time. Plus, he's never really had that much of an ear for music anyways. Explain from the beginning, says the other man in the screen, cocooned in the sort of shadow that light shies away from. If you would so kindly. He sits up, straightens his shoulders and puts on that winning smile. Nothing major. One of my Nomu escaped, and was retrieved immediately. He shoots back. No casualties, no interaction with heroes. The facility is secure. Don't you worry about that. Then how? Call it a fluke. He throws his hands up, clearly being facetious. But it's the easiest way to worm his way out of this. There might have been some issues with the handlers, which, I might add, you assigned. Silence in return. He's sitting on the knife's edge now. Okay, he begins again. Here's what we'll do. A cover-up. You get some of your contacts to buffer all I can give you, and you'll hold off on. No, says the man in the screen. The schedule remains the same. Are you sure? Because I'm thinking. I suggest you not make a mistake again, Osborne. Black. The line's cut. He can breathe again. Norman Osborn leans back and slumps deep into his desk chair, not much caring about how this might crease his suit. He closes his eyes, lets out a breath he hadn't even realized he was holding. In the dark of his office, he flickers and fades, and for just one moment lets the lights go out. Just one moment. One moment is all he's ever needed. The cover-up that's still on today's itinerary. He'll need to review the reports, see who he can get in contact with to ensure the trail goes cold on the investigation. Not that he thinks they'll find anything, but he had to be thorough. No TIs to Oz, no TIs to him. He sits back up again, swiping the laptop's touchpad and navigating to his thrice encrypted emails. One of their contacts in the local authorities forwarded him a few photos and names, plus what little progress was building on the case thus far. Considering what he's already been clued in on, it should be an easy task. Upon navigating to one of the attachments and clicking it twice with gusto, he scans what few media and police photos were taken, none that give much away. He had read that there was something to do with two high schoolers being able to contain it, which he almost wanted to bring up during the call, but felt it wise to keep his mouth shut about. Children, he grouses under his breath, tapping an arrow key to take him to another photo. How are his toys meant to work if they can't even rip apart a few children? Honestly, another photo. This one's of the teens. One's blonde, taller, staring dumbly into space. The other is, it's Norman doesn't even know when he threw the laptop. Doesn't know when he'd punched a hole in his desk. That's $15,000 down the drain. People would ask questions. He could just say he got sick of it. What about the laptop? He could say he spilled tea on it. No one would question anything. No one questions him. That is all beside the point. He clamps his hand over his mouth as though he knows. He's rearing to scream before the sound even starts to build in his throat. An amplified silence fills the room. Norman is drowning. Norman is burning. This is too much, far too real to be a dream, or nightmare, or the result of a chemical farrago produced by a deteriorating mind. He can walk on his own defeat. He can breathe. He is alive and he is in control. But he has just seen a ghost and does not know what to do. Norman stands in the silent gloom of his office until the sun starts to rise and golden light gleams off the steel and glass of buildings adjacent his own. His office, his bastion, is pierced by ochre beams that stab into the room. His hand pulls away from his face. He is smiling. A choked and wretched sound rises from his throat. It grows and swells like the resultant ash of an explosion, echoes through the soundproof walls and suffuses the room in an instant. Norman Osborn howls. The keening felt deep in his chest, and tears stream down his cheeks and fly like raindrops with every hiccup and shiver. He is alive. He is in control. Norman Osborn is not crying. The Green Goblin laughs and laughs and laughs. End of chapter 9. Link down to the comments if you want to read the rest of the story. I hope you all enjoy. Goodbye.